All right, let's get right into it. We're jumping back in time to the early 18th century to talk about a single day, one day that would literally shape the next 300 years of European history. We're talking about a battle that didn't just end a war, it demolished one empire and built another.
Just take a look at the epic scale of this. This is it, July 8th, 1709. Two giant armies clashing on a field in what is now Ukraine. What you're really seeing here is the final, bloody moment of years of ambition, a brutal campaign, and one king's incredible all-or-nothing gamble. This was the day everything changed.
And really, the stakes just could not have been higher, because when all the smoke cleared, the most feared military power in Northern Europe was completely shattered, and the world suddenly had a new superpower to worry about.
So, to really get how we ended up here, we need to zoom out a little bit. This battle didn't just happen in a vacuum, right? It was the absolute climax of a much larger conflict, the Great Northern War.
You've got two titans in the ring here. In one corner, you have the Swedish Empire. They are the European superpower of the day, led by King Charles XII, a guy who was seen as a military genius, basically unbeatable. And in the other corner, you have Tsarist Russia, a huge, kind of underestimated nation led by Peter I, who we now call Peter the Great. He is wildly ambitious, he's ruthless, and he is laser-focused on dragging Russia into the modern age and grabbing a seat at the big table. For years, these two have been duking it out for control of the Baltic.
Now here's where the story gets really fascinating. How on earth did this seemingly unstoppable Swedish army end up stranded so deep inside enemy territory, so weak and vulnerable? Well, it's a wild tale of overconfidence, terrible logistics, and, some of the worst weather in recorded history.
Okay, so let's walk through this disaster of a campaign. It starts in 1707. Charles marches into Russia with this incredible army, almost 44,000 strong, and he's pointing them straight at Moscow. But Peter the Great is clever. He refuses to give him a big, decisive battle. Instead, he uses what we call scorched-earth tactics. His armies burn everything, villages, crops, leaving nothing for the Swedes to live off of. Then, in a devastating ambush, the Russians completely destroy the Swedish supply train. And just when you think it can't get any worse, it does. The winter of 1708 hits. They called it the Great Frost, the coldest winter in 500 years. The Swedish army, with no food and no supplies, just freezes. By spring, what's left of them is a shadow of its former self, desperate enough to attack the fortress of Poltava just to find something to eat.
And this map shows you the absolute strategic nightmare they were caught in. They were supposed to be striking at the heart of Russia, at Moscow. Instead, they get diverted hundreds and hundreds of miles south, deep into modern-day Ukraine, stretched incredibly thin and just getting weaker with every single step.
So by the time they even get to Poltava, that deadly combination of guerrilla warfare, outright starvation, and that horrific winter, it had cut Charles's elite invasion force in half. 50%. Half his army was gone before the big fight had even started.
So, this all brings us to the battle itself. His army is at its absolute breaking point, and Charles knows he has to force a fight right now. But then, on the eve of the most important day of his life, disaster strikes.
You can't make this stuff up. Charles, this legendary warrior king who always led from the very front of every charge, gets hit by a stray bullet in the foot while scouting. The wound is so bad he can't even stand, let alone lead an army. He's forced to hand over command. Think about that. On the day of the battle, the symbol of Swedish might, their invincible leader, is being carried around on a stretcher.
And if the leadership problem wasn't bad enough, just look at these numbers. It's staggering. The Swedes were already outnumbered almost 3-to-1 in terms of soldiers, but the artillery, look at that. The Swedes could only get 4 cannons onto the main battlefield. 4. The Russians had 86. This wasn't going to be a fair fight. It was an industrial-scale mismatch.
The battle, for the Swedes, was a complete catastrophe from start to finish. It basically happened in 3 disastrous acts. First, their plan that just punched through a line of Russian defensive forts gets totally botched. The orders are confusing, the attack gets bogged down, and it's a bloody mess. Then, a massive chunk of their army, about a third of their infantry, gets completely separated from the main force, surrounded, and forced to surrender. Finally, what's left of the Swedish line makes one last desperate charge, but they're just too few. The huge Russian army simply swallows them up, and the Swedish army, it just disintegrates.
That collapse was absolute, and the consequences were immediate. Poltava wasn't just a loss for Sweden, it was the end of their world as they knew it, and the very beginning of a new one.
These numbers here, they tell the whole brutal story.
The Swedish army wasn't just defeated, it was effectively erased from existence. Their casualties were at least double what the Russians suffered. Pretty much their entire force was either killed, wounded, or captured in a single day.
And this image says it all, doesn't it? There he is, Peter the Great, the ambitious challenger, celebrating his victory on the battlefield. This picture captures the exact moment that power in Eastern Europe shifted for good. The old king was broken and a new emperor had arrived.
So why does this one battle from so long ago matter so much? Because simply put, Poltava was the birth certificate of the Russian Empire. It completely shattered Sweden's status as a great power, forever, and established Russia as the new boss in the neighborhood. This win gave Peter the Great everything he needed to keep building his new capital, St. Petersburg, and it put Russia on the fast track to becoming one of the most powerful empires on the planet.
Which really leaves us with one heck of a final thought, doesn't it? Yeah, Poltava was decided by cannons and tactics on the day, but that battle was only possible because of a scorched-earth strategy and a once-in-a-lifetime winter 2 years earlier. It really makes you wonder, how different would the last 300 years of history look if it hadn't been for the raw, brutal power of the Russian winter?